Hi, welcome to Sunday School. It's been a long time since I've seen everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. Sandy and I are doing fine. Nothing a haircut wouldn't cure. Maybe I'll have to let Sandy give it a shot. She says she can do it. Um, Today we're in the fourth of our series with dealing with messy relationships. The topic today is serve. Um, Now, have we all had good and bad service? We probably think even now and today in this stay-at-home order that we don't say, well, no, I'm not going anywhere. Who offer me service? But do you order food online or order things from Amazon or a vendor from Amazon? Uh, how good's the service? Um, and actually, what makes good service? Is it the way we're treated, the cost? If it's a restaurant, it's the ambiance. Um, Service, when you think about what is service, it is what? It's serving. How do I serve someone else? And that's what kind of today's lesson is. Because some of us kind of think, well, we're in America, we're kind of self-made people, right? Nobody helped us get to where we are. But we know if we think about it, someone along the way helped us. A relationship that we had, the person we met that trained us, that taught us, that gave us some ideas. Um, so some of us actually think that relationships are to be used to build my business, to take a step forward, to move up in the world. So sometimes we think it's just, what can I get out of this relationship? But how does it benefit me? But I think our relationships would thrive if we thought about, instead of focusing on how others can help me, but the question is, how can I serve them? One of my favorite books is Ken Blanchard, I think Servant Leadership is the title. And it kind of plays into this, how do I be a better person, a better boss, by how do I serve others? So this is what today's lesson is how do I serve others? It's looking at what Paul was telling the Galatians, how to be better servants. So we're going to be in Galatians. Now, Paul established the church in Galatia on a second missionary trip. You can see that in Acts 16. And revisited during the third trip. And this letter is written kind of in between those two trips. It was written about 49 AD. And many of the believers had a Gentile background, so there wasn't a lot of Jewish history. So they had no prior knowledge of no previous spiritual knowledge at all, and were actually eager to hear and accept the teaching. So it really struck a chord with them. But after Paul left, Jewish Christians came in, and of course, what did they preach? You must become like Jews. You must accept the Mosaic laws before you're truly saved. You must, that the idea that Jesus came to save the Jews and that their salvation was based on the work they did. Some of the Judaizers at the time thought that you actually had to be circumcised. And all of this false teaching, they'd forgotten that salvation wasn't through grace, but it was earned by what works they did. And in the book of Galatians, Paul's trying to explain the In the first couple of chapters, in chapters 2 to 4, he's thinking the preeminence of faith, and in chapters 5 and 6, he's talking about the ethical implications of what faith is and how do I apply it. And here we're going to highlight the freedom we have as Christians, but it's not defined by what we're allowed to do, but it's how do we serve others. So let's look at chapter 5, verses 13 and 15. I'll put that down here where I can see it. You, my brothers, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge in sinful nature. Rather, serve one another in love. The entire law is summed up in a single command: love your neighbor as yourself. If you keep on biting and devouring each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. So, Jesus called us into liberty. He came to set us free, set us from free, not to keep us in bondage, not to give us a whole new set of rules. And some people, and maybe even Christians themselves, think we're a little bound up. We're a little stick in the muds. We don't like to have fun. All these rules and regulations. But Christ came to give us freedom. And that's really the essence of being a Christian. Now, this freedom is not to use this liberty for our own flesh, our own body, our own passions, to sin as we please, and then ask a spineless God, like, oh, God, forgive me, I did something wrong, and then proceed to go on and redo what was bad. So it's kind of like, okay, I've got God's my get out of jail free card, and when I sin or feel guilty, I just pull it out, say my prayers, and go on. But Paul warned his believers. He wanted them to that when he was warning them, that he was writing to the believers. So he was not writing to non-believers, or writing to believers. They have faith in Christ. They were baptized in Christ. He reminds them of that. They're called to liberty, that they were made free in verse 1 of chapter 5. But he questions how they could use their liberty. I mean, we're all free to choose. We could use this to please ourselves, but the context here is not that we focus on how to please ourselves, but how we treat one another. But we have to serve one another. The antidote is to this anxiousness, this feeling of I gotta do it for myself, is actually to use this liberty to serve one another. I mean, because when we think about what we're serving the flesh, what the flesh expects us, that when we think about only of ourselves, our little mini me, we expect everybody to conform to us, to do what we want. It doesn't care about others. But when we, through love, serve one another, we kind of conquer our flesh. We kind of get past ourselves. We kind of, when you start focusing on others, we take away all of our own passions. Because Christ came not to serve, but he didn't want to be served. He didn't want the disciples and everybody else to put him up on a pedestal. What did he do? He served them. He washed their feet. He died on the cross. All for what purpose? To serve us. Because the law that the Jews were trying to get people to follow is all fulfilled in this attitude of service. Um, the law fulfills what serving does, is actually what fulfills the greatest commandment, to love your neighbor as yourself. So if you wanted to be a legalistic, if you wanted to be a Judaizer, what would you want to do? You'd want to love your neighbor. Not get circumcised, not do all this other stuff, but to love your neighbor. So let's look at chapter 6, verses 1 to 5. Brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you are spiritual and should restore him gently. But watch yourself, so you may also be tempted. Carry each other's burdens. In this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks he is something when he is not, he deceives himself. Each of you should test his own actions. Then he can take pride in himself without comparing himself to someone else, for each one should carry his own load. So, what do I get here? I get, the question is, do we believe that each of us are responsible for our own actions, our personality, our personal choices? But Paul realized people sin. He realized people make the mistake. But he wasn't saying, oh, you sin, boom, you're cut off from the church. But he didn't want the sinner to stay in their sin. Now, granted, the letters written to people not that are hardened sinners, but instead to someone that's kind of fallen into trapped into a place they maybe thought they couldn't get out of. It wasn't planned. It was a mistake rather than a misdeed. So he wanted to what? He wanted to restore them. He didn't want to ignore it. He didn't want to excuse it. He didn't want to destroy them. He wanted to restore them. The Greek in this case is to put in order, or to restore to formal condition. It actually refers to a medical term for like setting a broken bone, a fracture, or a dislocated shoulder. Put it back into its normal function. But of course, the church sometimes neglects restoration. The tendency is to pretend maybe a sin didn't happen, or in some cases maybe react too harshly. It's too easy to respond with gossip and harsh judgment. But Paul was saying, no, we need a spirit of gentleness, to full of understanding that basically we potentially have that same weakness, and we need to guard ourselves, that we don't get too prideful, that we fall into sin, but that we go and lift them up and gently restore them, to restore their faith, restore their problem, restore them back to their way they were before they fell. Now, it's kind of like he's saying, I want to each of us bear each other's burdens. Paul kind of paints a picture, at least in the language, of a person sagging under a heavy load. And the focus is not to expecting others to bear my burden, but to help lift that burden, kind of focusing on other people to look for a brother or sister who's with a burden and help them with it. We all have burdens. And God didn't mean for us to carry them by ourselves. If you look at what Jesus told in the book of John 13, 34 and 35, a new command I give you is love one another as I loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know you're my disciples if you love one another. He wants us to care about each other. And by that caring, and our class does a great job of how much we care for one another. The phone calls, the letters, It's just amazing how we're getting together. I'm hoping that when we get back together, we'll pull all that back together. But Paul kind of hits at the legalistic of the times right between the eyes, saying, if you want to obey the law, here's the one law to fulfill. I mean, Jesus gave us a new law, a new commandment. And he says, if you want to obey the law, do this. Love one another. Bear one another's burden. Because what he's saying, if we think we are something, if we think we're important, if we think we're self-centered, we're so important, that leads to pride. Pride is self-focused. I'm more important. I deserve more attention. It actually pride prevents us from caring for someone else's burdens. Pride stops us from even accepting help. But the Bible, biblical humility says, I'm not more important. Let me take care of you. Let me look at someone else's burdens and help them. If we look at Philippians 2, 3, and 4, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of the others. Yeah, pride deceives us. We're blinding of the gifts of God. It blinds us to our own sin and depravity. It blinds us to the good in others. It blinds us to the foolishness of self-centeredness. Sometimes we get angry if we're deceived. But we have to remember how serious pride is. I mean, what was Satan's problem? Pride. Before the fall and after the fall. So we need to examine our own work. Take careful, somber examination. What we want is our work to be accepted by God, our service to be accepted by God. So on the day of our reward, we can rejoice. In that day of judgment, each of us is going to look at the bearer, we'll have to bear our own load. There's nobody going to be around us to support us on Judgment Day. It's us and God saying, here, this is everything I've done. But we have an opportunity. If you look at Galatians 6:10 and see what the opportunity we have. Therefore, as we have the opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially those who belong to the family of believers. We have this opportunity. Paul includes himself in this message. Not lose heart. Seek to do good. Look at the resources we've been given. Look at the loads we can carry and go out and help, especially those that are in the faith, because that's how people will see us, how we're supporting each other. That's how the rest of the world will see if we actually are believing. How do we treat one another? How do we lift each other's burden? And especially a time like this, we all have burdens. So this week, what I want you to do is 3 basic areas. Your family. Be intentional. How are they being a blessing to you? How can you go that extra mile to serve them? The church. Is there a way you can minister? A service project, a long-term ministry, a phone call, a prayer request, something that you can do to help. And then the community. Think of what gifts you have. How can you use the resources you have to find a need and then take some action? So this week, I want you to look at how can you serve. And yeah, you're home, you're isolated, you may think there's no way I can serve anybody, but there is. You have to look at your talents, your abilities, and then see how you can serve one another. I love you guys. We miss you. Can't wait to get together. Be safe. See you next time. Bye-bye.